awesome presentation. You said there's no parks anywhere on that side of town,
That's right. So the west side has long been a dead zone for parks. Yeah. Yeah, thank you. Sure, great. David, would you like to explore? So the west side of Athens, it's no coincidence that the west side of Athens has been suffering lately. Businesses have been moving out. It's in some ways a dreary corridor into our community. Oftentimes when we're telling people where the park is, we'll try to orient them up Beach Haven Church, but if they fail to know that, the only other thing we can say is it's by the giant Arby's sign, you know? The Youth Development Task Force did a survey of the families living in that area, especially in Sycamore Drive, and for those children, the only really leisure activity they can have is walking all the way from there to the library. So this is a real dead zone for young people. It was one of the areas that the Youth Development Task Force identified as an area that was so devoid of activity that it was an at-risk youth catalyst. And so we really see this as an important way to kind of address that corridor, but also provide much needed services to the people on the west side. Lastly, I'll just say, of course, in the future, I hope that there's even more west side parks, but this would be an important conduit to that. It would extend the greenway out towards this direction so that further west side parks could also leverage that. Yes?
I did not see in the proposal any mention of a way to get from Sycamore Drive across Atlanta Highway to the area. And that is not something you want even adults to do.
That's correct, yeah. I mean, anyone who drives around Athens, especially driving down Atlanta Highway, have seen people forced to put themselves at risk just to cross the street. We will say that all the stars on the original map different access points. So let's go back here. So there's various places where you can enter. Matthews Motors property is right behind the Home Depot. And part of our project, roughly half of our construction costs, are about constructing a bridge here where people that cross by the Home Depot would be able to walk, I'm sorry, the old Hobby Lobby, would be able to walk across. It'll be a little bit of a walk. But individuals that cross safely at that crosswalk would have access to this bridge, which would also serve to help address some of the congestion that might come through from various entry points. But we see that as one of the safest, and there is so much residential here and here and here that we think that's probably the safest avenue into the park. Yes?
I think that crossing that you're talking about has been identified in the Atlanta Highway Corridor Study focus groups as something to deal with.
Right.
So that would maybe
Well,
dovetail.
the one at Hawthorne and Alps and Broad is, but this is
Yeah.
further down.
Yeah.
So I'm just worried that people are gonna try to cross, because they do now.
So-
It makes me crazy.
Laura, it's a great question. I'll also point out there's also the Kroger there, so oftentimes when we give tours, they'll meet us at where the old Kroger was. You know you're in the south and you're giving directions based on where something used to be.
Yeah.
The old Kroger, Omni site. So we do have some folks that can park there and walk across. But congestion leads to demand and demand leads to change. Certainly if this is gonna help reinvigorate the area, that's gonna lead to those additional crosswalks.
I just want y'all to keep that in your plan.
Okay, will do, glad to.
What sort of condition are the structures currently in?
Yeah, so if you'll actually refer to page 4, you can see what we've done in terms of stabilization of the roof and the windows, which has prevented additional environmental factors from intensifying the damage on the house. The house itself is still in remarkable shape, as are the bridges, but that was after the result of careful restoration. We see this as a place where not only can you have outdoor hiking, but there's also things that could lead to revenue here. The house itself is beautiful, and the area could be used for programming, camps, private events, but the house itself is primed to be restored. Yeah. Yes, Tom?
This proposal is asking us to recommend to the citizens of the community a project about $13.6
That's right.
million. That's a lot of money.
It is.
And in your proposal, as a sweetener, you say, if property values increase by 7% in response to the opening of Beach Haven as a public park, That could increase the annual tax revenue by 4.5 million, or an annual increase of about 300,000 per year. How confident are you about those numbers? Where do they come from?
Right. So, Tom, I'll answer that in two parts briefly. First, to say that those estimates were put together as we created the project itself. I wasn't involved in the actual calculation of those numbers. It seems likely, but it's also forecasting. But I want to say as a second part, I think there's a better answer I can give you to this.
Okay.
The residents of this area are helping pay for SPLOST, right? The west side pays for SPLOST, just like everyone else pays for SPLOST. But for decades, the SPLOST money they've been spending at that Citgo and at that Hobby Lobby and at Target and all these other west side places have been unfairly funneled to the other sections of town. And so I think we can talk economic development and tourism all day, and those are very important things. But I think one of the things I was so proud of the commission this year is they unanimously decided that equity should be one of the considerations made by this committee. And it's unequitable that that side of town has been spending so much money in SPLOST without getting the kind of parks that we see on the eastern side. So I think that, do we want to recoup it? Absolutely. But at the end of the day, I don't think this is about recoupment. This is about what's fair to that side of town. With that said, there were very smart people, some of them are in the room, that helped come up with that portion of the document, and I'd have trust in their ability. Yeah.
So you're gonna stand on equity rather than these being economic development concerns?
I think that we've seen, just for example, in the last presentation, the emphasis on when people travel to a site. And we've seen a national recognized expert, as included and quoted in this, emphasize that people will travel to see this. So certainly we're going to see some additional economic development on top of whatever revenues captured in the park, on top of whatever this does to that side of town, because certainly anyone who drives through there knows there's very few public amenities. To put an exact dollar value on that, I couldn't do any better than what's in the report.
Tommy, if I may, our office helped to create those numbers.
Yeah.
I can speak to them a little bit.
Please. Okay.
I run the sustainability office for Athens Clark County. The way that we came to those numbers is we looked at what does the research show about property value increases in proximity to a park. And what it spoke to most was residential property, and it spoke to the distance less than a quarter mile. So we ran a buffer around that property in GIS, which is computer mapping, captured all of those parcels that are within a quarter mile, and then we went to the tax assessor and used their assessed value. And so it was just a simple model. If you take assessed value and go on the low end of what we've seen documented across the nation, you come up with that $4.5 million. So to answer your question, we're confident.
Okay. And that's why we put it on the coalition. Yes.
I wonder what's the minimum that would have to be done to allow the public to enter the park. But I do know this. Fundraising was done to put a new foundation, to strengthen the foundation of the summer house and put a new roof on. That's still a fragile structure. So would work have to be done on that as part of getting ready for the public to be able to use the park?
Yes, but that is included in our cost, the complete rehabilitation of the house.
Right.
But yes, we would want to move swiftly to get that fixed up. Yeah, and yeah, certainly foundational elements were restored, but also I think the key element, you know, the number one solvent in the world is water. So anything we can do to keep water out is really important. For right now, that's stabilized.
What's the minimum?
Yeah.
I know the road would have to be smoothed out and corrected to allow people. I think there'd have to be some parking maybe inside. What is the minimum you think
Sure.
would have to be done to allow the public, to open it to the public?
Sure. So the hard truth is, with the exception of the bridge, which is a project we can talk about as a kind of an addendum to this, that's part of it. The costs you see here are the costs that we put together with planning based on their needs on what a park like this requires. There's no basketball court, swimming pool. This is simply to get the trails in adequate condition. Once again, that's tough because you have $200 million worth of park requests this year. But I do want to point out that this park, the only park that will serve this area, represents less than 7% of that total park ask.